Welcome, everybody. I'm Charlotte McBurney with the News Media Alliance, and I'm your host of Free Press Focus, a sub-series of the News Take podcast designed to explore pressing issues related to the free press and the First Amendment. This episode, we dive into the issue of journalist protection, what threats journalists face in performing their job, and what can be done to protect them. This is an extremely important issue for the News Media Alliance and an area in which we have advocated for greater protections for journalists. Our members are newspapers and magazine organizations, and they deeply care about the well-being of their journalists, who often put their safety on the line to bring us the news and the information that we rely on to be informed as a community about the country and beyond. On today's episode, we have two esteemed guests, Paul Gillespie. Paul has been a photojournalist at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland since 2000. He is a 2019 Pulitzer Prize recipient and was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year alongside the staff of the Capital Gazette. Gillespie is one of 6 survivors of the 2018 mass shooting at the Capital Gazette, in which he lost 5 close colleagues. He is one of 2 survivors who still work for the publication today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Dan Shelley. Dan is the president and CEO of the Radio Television Digital News Association, RTDNA, the world's largest professional organization dedicated exclusively to broadcast and digital journalism. RTDNA's mission is to promote and protect responsible journalism. Dan has an extensive background in digital media, including his previous role as Senior Vice President, Digital Content Strategy at iHeartMedia. Thank you for being here, Dan.
Thank you.
So welcome, Dan and Paul. Very happy to have you both here for this important conversation. Paul, if I may, I'm going to start with a couple of questions for you. Paul, when did you start working in the news industry as a photojournalist? And I'm curious what your initial draw was towards the career.
My first staff job was back in 1997, I believe it was, at a group of weekly papers in New Jersey called the Current newspapers. And I started there because I wanted to be a photographer. I thought I was going to be a commercial photographer, but I wound up getting a job as a photojournalist, and it was a weekly paycheck shooting pictures, and I just fell in love with meeting people and telling their stories with my camera. So that's how I got started back there. I came to Maryland in 2000 to take a job at the Maryland Gazette, which was part of the Capital Gazette newspapers.
Wow. That's a long time ago. It's an amazing career you've had so far.
I've been lucky.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I guess that's about 23 years you've worked at the Capital Gazette. Is that about right?
It'll be 24 years in October 24th. I remember the day.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations. That's really impressive. So, I mean, obviously the difficult conversation that, I wanted to have with you today is about something that happened in 2018. You and your colleagues were attacked at work when a lone gunman blasted his way into the newspaper's office and callously killed 5 of your colleagues and tried to kill others, including yourself. I'm so sorry for your loss and for the families who lost someone for that day. I can't imagine ever going through that.
Hoping it's something that no one ever has to go through again, but it seems like every day there's mass shootings.
Absolutely. I know it's just awful. And so unimaginable. I mean, when you started out your career as a photojournalist, did you consider it to be a dangerous profession? Did you imagine that something like this would ever happen to you or your colleagues?
I didn't think it would happen to me and my colleagues. I knew it could be a dangerous profession. One of my photographic, I don't know if I would call him a hero, but Dan Eldon was killed. He's about my age. He's a photojournalist who was killed in Somalia back in 1991, I believe, during, when all that was happening. Mm-hmm. And I saw a video called Dying to Tell the Story, and it was about how journalists are killed, like often to bring people the news around the world. But, I was working in a southern New Jersey beach town where it was lifeguard races and, chicken bake, fundraisers and stuff like that. So I didn't think it would ever happen to me. I mean, you know, I don't know if we'll talk about it later in the program, but I didn't think it was happening to me the day it was happening to me. You know.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been the biggest shock. And feel free to, talk about that with us.
Yeah.
Sort
Well,
of.
the day I was just I photographed an earlier assignment. I went back to the newsroom and I was editing my pictures there. And I don't need to edit there, but I like to edit there to be with my colleagues, like and see people. And so I just finished editing the pictures from the first job, and I was waiting to go to my second job, and I was looking at pictures of what I photographed at that job the previous year, so I didn't repeat myself.
Mhm.
And that's when it all started happening. The loud bang, crash of the glass. I stood up, turned around, and I saw him briefly come into the room with the shotgun. That's when I dove under my desk. I actually dove under my colleague's desk because it was not facing the doorway where he was coming in, so I was hoping he wouldn't see me.
Mhm.
And he just started shooting people. And I heard Wendy get up, Wendy Winters, and she yelled, "No, you stop this right now!" And she tried to fight him off, and he shot her right in the. It's not a hallway; it's just like a between the desk areas.
Mhm.
So I'm under my desk thinking, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. This isn't happening." A guy did not just walk in here with a shotgun and start shooting people. And I'm like, as the more shotgun blasts go off, I'm like, this is really happening, and I'm going to die under this desk here. There's no way he didn't see me, and this is it. I hope my wife is going to be okay. Hopefully she knows where all the bank accounts are and everything.
Wow.
And he just continued to kill people around me. He shot Rob and Gerald right across from me, no more than 10 feet away from me. And I'm like, I'm next. And if I see his feet come around my cubicle, I'm going to shove this chair at him and try to fight. But he did not come around that way. He just kept walking down the runway towards the back of the newsroom where all the other reporters were. And at that point, they had been scrambling to go out the back door and stuff, which he had locked. He had blocked it off with a device. So they couldn't get out that door. So they were all hiding. And and as I'm laying there, I'm thinking, if I hear a lull, he's got a shotgun. He's got to probably be reloading or something like that. So I'm going to try to make a run for it. Maybe I'm going to see what. So when I heard the lull, I got up from under my desk and I went out and I looked over to the right towards the back of the room, and he had either just shot John McNamara or was about to, and he saw me and he started to chase me. I had to get over my colleague Wendy Winters because she was laying there in the hallway, like the runway. And for a split second, you're like, "Can I help her?" And I'm like, "I can't stop because if I do, I'm going to get shot in the back of the head." So I jumped over Wendy. I made a left to go towards the door. That's when the shotgun went off again. I felt the breeze of the shotgun slugs go past my head and hit the wall. You can actually see it on the video. Like I've seen video during a trial of it, like just barely missing me by like an inch. And I had to jump over Rebecca, who was the receptionist. She was on the ground in the doorway trying to crawl out. And I got over her and I ran into a closet. And then from there, I'm thinking there's no lock on this door. He's going to come in here. So I opened the door again and I ran out waiting to be shot. But luckily, he had stopped chasing me at that point and went and hid under my desk.
Wow.
And like, so, yeah. I don't want to take up all the time talking about what happened, but
No, it's
ran over to the bank. I ran inside the bank, TD Bank, across the street from us, and I said, someone's shooting up the Capitol Gazette newsroom. You got to lock that door and call 911 right now." And no one moved because I was so out of breath. I don't even know if the words came out. So I got it up again and I yelled it two more times, and then people started doing things, and then the rest is. So that's what happened that day.
wow, absolutely terrifying. I mean, you barely made it out alive.
I did. I would have been, his sixth life term was for my attempted murder.
Right.
And,
Well, we're so grateful that you did make it out alive and that you're here to talk with us about this. I mean, I think we all wish we didn't have to even discuss an issue like this.
I wish every day we could go back to June 27th and have it be like it was with my coworkers and me working in our newsroom and just try to, tell the stories from our community.
Absolutely. I mean, you've come so far since that day. It's incredible that you've managed to go on and do meaningful work and honor your colleagues.
That's what keeps me going, is trying to honor my colleagues. I struggle every day with PTSD and depression and anxiety, and it's been really hard. Especially this last couple months have been extra hard on me for some reason. Every day is hard, but it's getting hard again. It's something that I don't think ever will go away. I hope it gets easier, but I don't know. The loss of our newsroom during COVID and stuff like that does not help because it isolates me more. It keeps me from seeing my coworkers and stuff like that. So, that's something I think about because I'm constantly alone now doing my job, and you never get to see your coworkers. So,
absolutely, that's completely understandable. And Dan, turning to you, there's been a real uptick in violence against journalists over the years. Unfortunately, Paul is not the only one to have experienced violence just trying to do his job. According to the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker in 2022, there were actually 40 assaults on journalists in the United States alone. And, those assaults can span from anywhere from what happened to Paul and his colleagues, awful shooting, to, journalists being robbed on the job, which happened recently in Chicago with a news crew literally filming a segment about armed robberies in the area, and they were robbed. So why do you think, Dan, that these spouts of violence are occurring? Why is it increasing? And do you see it as continuing?
Unfortunately, I do. And Paul, please accept my condolences and know that we're all thinking about you and your colleagues every single day. It's horrible what happened on that day more than 5 years ago now. But as you mentioned, Charlotte, unfortunately, that was not the last incident, and there will be others. Most notably and most tragically, in the fall of last year, Jeff Gehrman, an investigative reporter for the Las Vegas newspaper, was allegedly hunted down, stalked, and then shot to death by an elected public official on whose office Gehrman had been exposing malfeasance. And that gentleman is now going through the court process. And this past February in Orlando, Florida, a young journalist in his first professional job, a television journalist, Dylan Lyons, was shot and killed by a gunman while he was doing a live shot, a live report from the scene of a previous murder. And it turns out that the man who was accused of that previous murder returned to the scene after seeing Dylan Lyons' live shot. He shot Dylan and his photojournalist and then went to hide in a nearby house where he shot and killed someone else. He's now facing prosecution in Florida. But as you noted, Charlotte, this is a troubling, increasing trend. Unfortunately, it's not new in the history of our constitutional republic. In the 1850s, a man who was a former Army general was running a community service organization in California. Was upset because a newspaper publisher and reporter and editor had exposed alleged malfeasance with a charity that he ran, and he was so upset about it that he tracked the guy down, the newspaper guy down, and shot and killed him. And that man's last name was Denver. And how was he remembered in history? Not for that, but because they named a city in Colorado you may have heard of after him. So this is not new in the history of our constitutional republic, but we have seen an alarming uptick in recent years, the last 8, 9 years, and it's disturbing, and it's causing newsrooms across the country to rethink how they're protecting their staffs and how they're protecting reporters and photojournalists and others. And it's causing a lot of newsrooms to hire private security, armed security. An armed security guard who was protecting a TV news crew in Oakland, California, was shot and killed almost 2 years ago now, Kevin Nishida, because someone tried to rob the TV crew of their equipment, and he stepped in to prevent it and was shot and killed. Two of those three suspects are in jail. The third is still at large. So there's been a physical hardening of newsrooms and news facilities. Crews have added armed security in many cases, but in far too many cases, there are still multimedia journalists, photojournalists, radio reporters predominantly, who work alone in the field and are subject to who knows what kind of harassment and potential violence. And so we are urging everyone to watch their backs but don't back down, to make sure you're always aware of your surroundings, and predominantly to always have and maintain the ability to say no. If your editor, your news director sends you to a place and you don't feel comfortable there, you've got to be able to say no and get to a safer location.
Absolutely. And so I guess beyond what newsrooms and journalists themselves can do to try and keep themselves safer these days, Dan, what more can be done? What role does our government maybe play in protecting journalists?
Well, before Congress right now is a bill called the Journalist Protection Act, which has been, this is the third consecutive Congress in which it's been introduced. It would make it a federal crime to physically assault and cause physical harm to a journalist while that journalist was performing his or their duties to seek and report the truth on behalf of the public. Why do we need a federal law to do this? Think of it, and I'm not trying to equate journalism and the civil rights movement, but think of it as in the context of the Federal Civil Rights Act, which allows the federal government, the Department of Justice, to step in if someone denies another person their civil rights. In the case of the Journalism Protection Act, it would allow the Department of Justice to step in the event that a local prosecutor undercharged or declined to charge for whatever reason someone who had threatened or had carried out physical harm against a journalist. In addition to the cases that I just mentioned with in Nevada and in Orlando, a few months ago in southeastern Oklahoma, a local sheriff was caught on tape threatening to murder the local newspaper publisher. In Marion County, Kansas, authorities raided the newsroom there on what appeared to be trumped up charges that were later dismissed. And while no one was physically assaulted by police during that raid, the 98-year-old co-publisher of the newspaper, associate publisher, the mother of the publisher and editor, died allegedly of anxiety within 24 hours or so of that police raid. And in the case of Oklahoma, state authorities have declined to prosecute. So the Justice Department is looking at that situation. It's still being litigated and pursued in the case in Kansas. The bottom line here is we need this backstop, if you will, of federal protection in the event that local authorities decline to act whenever a journalist is attacked. That will not make a journalist safer on the streets or in his newsroom or her newsroom or their newsroom, but it will send a strong message to the American people that violence against anyone, particularly journalists, seeking and reporting the truth on behalf of the public, will not be tolerated.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. Dan. The News Media Alliance is strongly supportive of the Journalist Protection Act and will continue to work with your group, RTDNA, and others to support that legislation. And we certainly hope it passes very soon. It's much needed. Dan, what can the community do here? What can our listeners do to help support, protect journalists in their work?
Well, first understand the role of a journalist. And I realize that we live in a very polarized society, in a society in which, unfortunately, a seemingly growing number of people are expressing their lack of trust in the media, and and the media has a responsibility to work on that. No question about it, and to build trust. And there are specific steps journalists can take to help do that. But nothing excuses violence, and violence targeting journalists in particular. And not because journalists are some special class of protected people or should be, but because journalists, just like police officers, just like other public servants, live in the communities where they do their work. They work to make a better community by seeking and reporting the truth. When they uncover wrongdoing or malfeasance, then that's really a public service, because those stories, those images, often serve as catalysts for positive change in communities. And that's the message I think that the public needs to understand. That journalists aren't there to make communities look bad. Journalists aren't there to knowingly tell falsehoods. Journalists aren't there to try to stir up trouble. Journalists are there for the simple reason they want to make their communities better by informing the public about what their taxpayer dollars are being used for, what their police officers are doing to try to protect them in the community, etc. So this is a broader issue, trust in the media, trust in journalism specifically, and journalists' responsibility to be as even-handed and fair as is humanly possible, and the public's responsibility to make sure that they're seeking information from a variety of sources so that they don't get swallowed up in this black cloud of disinformation and misinformation, which too often leads to violence that targets journalists.
Very true, Dan. Thank you. And Paul, I want to turn to you because you've done a lot of work in the last few years to highlight the importance of journalists and put human faces to this profession, showing that they are members of our community and they serve a really important role. And you've done this through your project called Journalists Matter. For our listeners, you can take a look at Paul's project at journalistsmatter.com. I'd love to hear a little bit about what that project signifies to you, why you did it, and how it's helped you.
Sure. To pick up where Dan left off, journalists do everything he said, and we are also your sons and your daughters and your neighbors and people, like he said, people in your community. And we're just out there trying to make our communities better. And with my Journalists Matter project, I started doing that in the beginning of 2019 because I was having real problems with PTSD and depression. And I was sitting in this room where I'm at right now, just basically waiting to die, feeling like I was going to die. I don't know how I survived and all that survivor guilt and stuff like that. But the project came about because I saw a documentary about the photographer Platon and his portraits of people, and it was something that I was like, I'm a photographer. I want to take some pictures just to get my mind off things, So I cleared out some space in my basement, and I was like, who can I photograph? And I said, well, I'm around all these young journalists every day, and they love getting their pictures taken, so why not take their pictures? So I just started bringing in, my coworkers, my Capital Gazette family, to photograph them to help me with my depression and stuff like that. But after I started doing the work and putting it out on social media, people were like, these are fantastic, and this should really be something. So that's when it formed into the Journalists Matter Faces of the Capital Gazette project. So after I photographed some of the journalist I worked with, I said, we also have to show the people we lost. So I started asking children of Wendy Winters if they would mind coming in. And some of them started coming in, and then some of the widows of the people we lost, like Rob and Maria Hyacinth, like Maria came in for Rob to represent Rob, and Andrea Shambly came in to represent John McNamara. And I had the Winters kids, and eventually I wound up getting Rebecca Smith's sister, and the only one I haven't photographed from that day is Anthony, who was our intern, and I'll wind up getting him one of these days. But doing the project throughout like a 6-month period gave me something to do, like when I was sitting here off from work, because while I was working, it was great because I was seeing all my coworkers in our temporary newsroom, and we had armed security there, in our temporary newsroom, and also when we moved into our permanent newsroom. But they didn't go out with us on assignments or anything. They'd walk us to our cars if so, But so the project really meant something to me, and then over the time, it started meaning something to the people in the world, because I was able to raise a lot of funds to be able to print it and show it. And on the opening night, I must have had 400 people from our area come to the opening night, to see the project. And I had people in tears that were hardened photojournalists come see this project and just come up to me in tears saying how much it meant and how it affected them. So the Journalists Matter project has been something very special. I mean, it's probably the most important work I've done in my life, I believe. So.
It certainly shows. It's really incredibly inspiring and beautiful. I really encourage folks to check it out. And I'm sure it's inspired a lot of folks who are maybe considering a profession in journalism. Speaking of which, Dan, I want to give you the last word. What advice would you give to upcoming and young, newer journalists or maybe students that are thinking of becoming journalists? What would you say to them now?
Well, first of all, do it, because your community and the United States and the world actually need good journalists to not just to speak truth to power, but to hold the powerful accountable and to report stories in your communities that help make the community better ultimately.
Yes.
Journalism is a calling. It's not a job. It's a craft, to be sure, but in my view, it's a calling. And I hope that young journalists who are entering the workforce today will take appropriate steps to stand up for their own safety, both in terms of discussions with their newsroom leaders as they're sent on assignment. But understand that the reason you're doing this is not to get your picture on television, your face on television, not to get your voice on the radio, not to appear in a byline in a news publication, a magazine or a newspaper. But you're doing it because you're trying to make the community better, the community where you live. You're trying to make it a better place. And you're doing that by reporting facts that matter to your community.
Absolutely.
So, watch your back, don't back down, but be very safe, very responsible, very aware of your surroundings.
Thank you. Absolutely. And Paul, I'd actually like to ask you the same question. What advice would you give young journalists looking to start out?
Just go out there and try to tell the best stories you can from your communities, and be safe. I mean, Dan says don't back down, but it depends on what you're backing down from. If there's a threat of violence, back down and get out of there, and don't worry about what your editor's going to say, because in the end of the day, you coming home is more important than any story to your family and to your coworkers and stuff like that. In my opinion, it should be anyway. But,
Amen. Amen.
Keep trying to do the best job you can. We do an important job, not just the hard stories, but my photojournalism brings a community together. I mean, it shows the neighbors and stuff, and hopefully, if you know your neighbors, you're not hating your neighbors. Seeing them do good things for the community. You're not.
Absolutely.
It's going to build a community. It helps build the community.
We're really grateful that you've been able to share your story with us and highlight how you have helped the community and journalists like yourself do. So thank you. Thank you both for being part of this important conversation and shedding a light on these important issues. I really appreciate you being here today. And for our listeners, if you have any thoughts or questions, you're welcome to reach out to me at charlotte@newsmediaalliance.org. Please, if you can, subscribe to the Newstake podcast and share it with a friend or colleague who may be interested in this. And you can find the podcast on the major apps, YouTube, and our website, newsmediaalliance.org. Thank you again to my guests, Paul and Dan. Thank you both, and thank you everyone for listening.